Okay, welcome back to the Consultancy Growth Podcast. We have the pleasure of Chris Tomlinson here, who is the founder and CEO of Muuto, a rather splendid consultancy that's been a member of the Leaders Club, the Boutique Leaders Club, since its inception. Tomo, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about Muuto as well, please?
Yeah, no, happy to, Joe. I'm a bit of a geek for the big, complex transformation programs, which is where I've spent most of my career over the years. I've been probably a proper consultant, if there's such a thing, since I started working post-university for various different firms. I've worked in-house as a transformation director, an internal consultant, and then went back out into consulting to establish Muuto. Most of the work that I do, and therefore, as we built the firm, is around things with a red thread of organizational change and restructuring. So we've done big relocations, operating model shifts, big digital changes as well. So
interesting times. You've tell us a little bit. So I mean, I obviously know Muuto relatively well, and I would like to talk about a little bit about how it's unique, how it's different to what you would normally get. And you've worked for some of the big brand names. So how is your proposition different, or perhaps even a different focus to some of the more traditional approaches that you might get in the larger firms?
it's different the way we talk about it from larger firms, but also other boutiques. And I think this is kind of, maybe for the kind of people that will listen to your podcast as well. There's a lot of attention on niching down into specialist areas when you're in a boutique size. So be, truly deeply professional in a certain area. And then in the big firms, well, we've got, we'll cover multiple bases, and we've got breadth, and we've got, scale. And we haven't got scale. And if you say niche, our niche is a very broad niche on transformation programs. So we're still not, even as you hear me now, it's not crystal clear what our value proposition is. And that's kind of one of the things we talk about. Is we don't talk about us. We don't talk about what we do. We talk about what is the client problem, what are you trying to achieve, where are your blockers, because they'll be somewhere in the end to end of a transformation, but they'll be specific to the context of that organization, and actually it's intervening at that point in time and in that specific area that's the difference in how we go about it. So I don't know if that even sounds different, but it's a complicated thing to articulate, because frankly we just try and base it on where's the client need.
Okay, so listen, you guys are doing some interesting stuff in AI, and both you and I think, are both equally excited and potentially sometimes slightly terrified by the capabilities. I know we were talking about it just before the call. So could you tell us a little bit about when you first started getting interested in AI and how that's been introduced to Muuto?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a technologist, which I think is probably different from a lot of consultants who are leaning in on this space. I guess a bit of background context that maybe adds something to this. I started professionally consulting at Accenture. And when I joined Accenture, that was, right, everybody sits in a basement in Hatton Gardens and learns how to do Visual Basic and UML and Java, etc. So I didn't have a particular bias towards that, but I got some of the disciplines, and I got some of the language. I worked on, IT organizations, IT operating model, etc. So I've got a bit of a feel for the technology space, but I'm absolutely not a technologist. I understand digital operating models a bit, but no more than I do in other areas. So I think that's maybe worth kind of highlighting. The way, well, I got interested in it about the same time that everybody else did, I think, is when the generative stuff became accessible. I tried previously things that helped with drafting documentation, some of those early versions, but unless it helps us do our client work more efficiently, effectively, higher quality day to day, probably wasn't something I'd spend a lot of time around, even if we thought it was interesting. But yeah, we got into it at that stage, and I thought, well, this is going to be, I think, fundamentally different for the way consulting gets done. So let's lean in hard on it, and we have been doing ever since. So we're 2 years now, I think, since ChatGPT was launched. So
Yeah, great. Okay, okay. And so I met some of your team because I believe I did a small talk that's one of your away days, and it struck me that they were generally more enthusiastic than your average consultant when it comes to AI, and certainly more knowledgeable. So what have you done in terms of introducing the concept to the team and I guess selling them on the point of exploration?
I hope they are genuinely interested and excited by it, and they're not just kind of toeing the line. But I think that's unfair. I think lots of people are really engaging quite well in it. But I think we've got a normal distribution in Muuto, like you've got normal
Sure.
distribution everywhere else. So you've got people who, will always be kind of, I think, late to the party. You've got people at the front end who are like, all over it. And then you've got the group in the middle who could go either way or can be encouraged either way. So since I kind of got my head around a little bit of what I think the implications might be, I've been really pro and positive with the team about getting into it and experimenting. I think the bit that has been an interesting learning point is seeing how different people use it to tackle different things. And we can only do that through sharing, posting little videos. We're a virtual team as well. So it's how we do the sharing and the collaboration and encouraging that and removing blockers around that. Whilst it's much easier in a smaller firm like ours than it is in a big company with maybe more controls on firewalls, maybe more controls on what you can and can't use from different products and tools. Whereas we've actually given everybody an allowance to go and pick what they think is helpful and share it with others, rather than say we're rolling out, Copilot to everybody and then all they do is use Copilot. So
Yeah.
we've encouraged a lot of experimentation.
Okay. And can you give some practical examples of either how AI has enriched outcomes for clients or even outcomes for your internal teams?
I mean, that the client, the deployment with and for clients is the bit we're trying to work out. So, have we deployed anything for, for revenue and income with clients around AI? Not yet. We're starting to do some experiments and co-invest on that. And I don't think that's any different from the other firms out there. I think there's a lot of
Yep.
there's a lot of froth around this in the consulting IP space. Everything that used to be topic is now topic AI. And I'm not seeing much particularly new or applied in the white papers and the stuff and the marketing that's coming out from other consulting firms.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they are no further ahead in most cases than the organizations that they're consulting with. So they're all using some tools that are available, they're all experimenting, they're all probably lying about how much they are using it, which I think is interesting as you look at some of the research that comes out. So we haven't done anything with clients directly that's been revolutionary, but we've got a couple of really interesting conversations and experiments on the go at the moment. So
okay, are you allowed to share anything about the experiments that are happening?
Yeah, well, I mean, the obvious one, and I won't put client names into it, but the use cases I think are probably the most interesting bit anyway. So we do, as I say, we do a lot of organization design. We have our own organization design tool. And as part of that, we've got a core kind of module that does data ingestion, analysis, data cleanup, org chart visualization, etc. So what you would usually expect from a detailed org design project. And what we've done is that in experimentation with a couple of clients now is we've brought in the generative AI component into that, which feels like you're being, you're kind of undermining your own business model. But at the front end of that work, operating model design, option generation, analysis at the high level of the data, we've done that with some generative AI tools, and it has been fascinating to see how it prompts ideas and conversations with clients. That's the kind of interventionist side, but also just the speed with which you can get, iterations, analysis, and compare 1, 2, 3, 5, 20 options, where previously at that stage of an org design program, you're probably looking at a couple. Do we go left? Do we go right? And then when you've got a critical mass behind one of them, you go, this is where we're going, and then you just kind of build it. Whereas at this point, you can take a step back and say, actually, let's be really specific about what we want to achieve here and grade these options that we're looking at against a live organizational data set as well, which is really interesting. So it's not hypothetical, it's also linked to current spans, layers, locations, costs, etc. Even if you're just doing the analysis at the high level.
That's really interesting. So okay, so there's and I guess with that example, I get the data ingest, I get the analysis. I'm presuming to generate models, you need something beyond, or not beyond, but something different to ChatGPT 4, or
Yeah,
do
we're
you?
not using that. We're not generating the data outputs with AI at the moment. That's still our core
Okay,
tool. What we're
okay,
doing is at the as is data stage. What you can
yeah,
say is based on this and other artifacts,
yeah,
transcripts of conversations with C-suite is the way we've done it. Um, where's the misalignment? Where's the alignment? Give me a précis of the specific objectives, that you've
yeah,
heard
great,
consistently across it. So it's almost a way of very quickly, and this is not different from any other use case around the generative AI stuff, really, is give me a summary of that. But what's most powerful is when you say, and at the order of magnitude level, show me what the pros and cons, ups and downs, puts and takes are around
yeah,
organizational options. So that's before you then go into the detailed design of, well, where does position X go and where does person Y go
yeah.
in the to-be design, which is still something you would need to go through.
Yeah, okay. So that is quite exciting actually, isn't it? Well, I think your brain's a bit like mine because you can see where this is going. I guess this raises a wider question, which is achieving the balance between expertise, human expertise, and AI expertise, which are both equally fallible, and sometimes the human is
Mhm.
more fallible. But it's something I've struggled with, is balancing what I do best with what the AI does best. Now, have you found a secret formula to this, or is this a matter of experimentation?
Yeah, I mean, everything's the experimentation is more important than the destination for us at the moment, I think, because the use cases, like I say, different people approach things just, everybody's different. So they think about problems in a different way. But for me, it's about keeping our learning as close to the development curve of the technology as we can, rather than going, okay, I'm using this for a while, whilst the technology, the development moves on and you've got a bigger gap to what's happening. So I'm trying to keep us in that game and frankly leave
Yep.
a lot of options open because nobody knows where this goes.
Yeah.
But rather than make a call on we're going to stay in track A now and be wrong, I'd rather spread us a
Yep.
little thicker over multiple things and just see where this is super additive.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think this is so important, and if I guess if there was one message that I'd love, listeners who are senior in professional services to get from this would be this focus on experimentation, because things are moving quickly and they're going to continue to move quickly. But in some ways, if you're already thinking and experimenting and trialing, you're going to be so far ahead of people that aren't when a gap does come up, when there is an opportunity for you to do things faster or better or cheaper with AI. Um, and I think there's obviously model limitations at the moment. That thorny issue of hallucination hasn't gone away. They've made a lot of progress on security, and preventing data leakage. But it does strike me that the firms that are experimenting here are going to have a head start when it comes to, say they release ChatGPT 5, or they get AGI in 3 years' time. Maybe we all go home then, but at least we're gonna see what's coming down the tunnel at us.
Who knows where it goes? I think the bit that kind of going back to the boutique point is we're really well positioned to react quickly. But us and firms like
Yeah,
us, I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's the main thing. I spoke to a friend the other day who used to work in. He used to build he's a software engineer. He used to build tools for a big consulting house, one of the bigger strat houses. And the example he uses, one trying to say find analysis on data for double pavements or overpayments or whatever it was. That usually be a couple of consultants for 3 weeks hammering through spreadsheets. This would be a few years ago now. And they produced the product, and it did the work in 6 hours for one FTE to do a bit of oversight for a few days. And that immediately got pushed aside by the partners in charge of the work, because they were billing by the hour. And the more they were in the building, the more exposure they got. And it was basically this dilemma of efficiency and client value versus the other incentives that there are in bigger consulting companies. So a non-starter at that point. And I think that's what we're going to see in the larger firms, is they're going to stick to the pyramid model as long as they possibly can for partners who are at that stage of the career, whereas you're going to have smaller firms who can embrace this stuff and just pivot much faster. And it's going to undermine our billing model, but so be it. We either embrace it, or it's going to run us over.
Yeah, I agree. I think boutiques are at an advantage, and for in lots of different ways. And I think you've mentioned them all. One is their flexibility, the lack of process and regulation that constrains innovation, and very often the clients that use boutiques tend to be a bit more open-minded and perhaps more open to experimentation than if they're going with one of the big firms. It's something I was thinking a lot at the weekend, and this overlaps with our conversation prior to the podcast about agents. And what I find particularly interesting is the depth of expertise that boutiques have, and obviously the larger firms have, as well. But that depth of expertise isn't something that is currently captured by the models, because it can't be. You can do, the models have been trained on vast amounts of text and video and all the rest of it, but it hasn't been trained on Muuto's depth of experience with transformation or change management or whatever. And I think there's a real opportunity for boutiques to almost model out their work in terms of AI bots, agents talking to each other, and the data flows. And I think this is a good thing to do for boutiques anyway, because it helps them understand what they fundamentally do and what all the different roles should be, even if there's no automation or AI involved. But if you've got that feedback loop, which is the crucial bit, if you've got a feedback loop that says, here's the work we're doing, let's look at the output, what's right, what's wrong, what needs to be improved. And so you're slowly improving the model. And again, this works offline with humans and online with automation and AI. But if you could create even just for one service line or one process within a service line, if you could create that system whereby it learns, what you're building there is a fantastic set of capabilities that you can offer clients. You're getting some form of output, but it's not just that, it's continuously improving and learning from itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it a little bit like how you would develop capability in any young consultant coming through their career. It's kind of what you're trying to do with an agent as well. Now, there's a whole dilemma there about how do you develop the consultants of the future, but it's kind of TBC, I think, for all of us in lots of different walks of life. I think the multi-agent, the agentic thing anyway, and the way this is value add for clients, I think is very much how do you have a Joe.ai or a Tomo.ai, and how do you multiply the value that you can add to your clients rather than one conversation at a time per hour, etc. So I think that's where it will go for deep expertise in certain areas. How that's going to get deployed, curated, etc. Who knows? One of the bits we're talking to, this is one of the partner organizations that we're working with from the technical side at the moment, is they are developing multi-agentic models. So it's not just a wrapper on top of ChatGPT, which is a lot of the .ai stuff you see kicking around at the moment. The way they're doing it is, in some instances, they will have multiple agents playing multiple different roles that they have been trained on with proprietary IP, as where available, and public training data where they're just from the big models, to run through a scenario and provide an output, a critique from different angles, etc. So that I think is an interesting way of looking at it. But also, what is the leave behind for a client after we've done a piece of work? How do we say, we've done a 18-month health and safety and environment project with an organization. We've run training sessions, we've developed collateral, we've tailored stuff, we've translated it into multiple languages.
Yeah.
that is an incredibly high value leave behind for an organization, rather than just the hard drive or the inbox of the clients that you worked with as you did your kind of handover, I think. So, and there's value for the consultancy as well as there is for the client organization, because what's your IP you can take away with you, but also it keeps the contact over the longer term, which I think that's a value add for client and consultant.
Yeah. So for those of you who are listening who aren't particularly into AI, well, again, firstly, you shouldn't be listening. Secondly, the whole agentic thing is, so if you pile instructions and different steps onto one instance of AI, it tends to merge things and get confused and not play roles very well if you've got multiple roles. So the idea behind agents is that you have different instances of an AI playing specific roles. So if you've got your standard change management project, you might have a change manager, you might have a project manager, you might have a requirements analyst, and so on. And then they talk to each other in order to, in effect, replicate what a consultancy team might do. And I know you said earlier, Tomo, I don't know where this goes, or we don't know where this goes. I mean, it does raise an interesting point, doesn't it? In that if you have, and I think this is easier in some professional services than others. So I think law is, for example, and accounting are particularly susceptible, and they've been shown to be very susceptible to AI. I think it's a bit more complicated with consultancy because our subject matter organizations are quite complex and open, and almost you can't predict what's going to happen. But having said that, where do you see this going? So if the AI capability continues to improve, if you can train your own agents up to be generally as good as your consultants in some respects, do you eventually see this as something where you've got in effect AI is just another part of the automation? Or do you see it going a step further where we might not need consultants at all eventually? How much of an optimist are you, is what I'm asking.
No, I think my hypothesis is that relationship, rapport, problem solving, trust is going to become more and more valuable and important to the customer and our service provider, any kind of service. You will differentiate over that element of quality because a lot of the content will actually be commoditized. I feel, I don't know, but I think I'm not, I don't think it's the end of humanity from that point of view. I think it just means different skills will become more important, and there'll be new problems to deal with inevitably. And that problem solving bit, that novel problem that has not trained a bot, I think is going to be the bit where the value add is. I have with different clients I speak to the same conversation ostensibly every time at the start of an engagement around certain topics, certain ways of working, etc. But it's the context and the specifics that are the nuance on top of it. And I think that's the human judgment bit, which I think we're a long way off codifying at the moment. But
yes, I think you're right. And there's also something about, as you alluded to earlier, that person who needs to check the quality, where the Tomo of the future comes from, or the partner or the director comes from, who says, well, actually, this was a good first attempt by this set of agents, but it's missed something quite important.
And I think that will iterate and improve. So even that as a challenge, I think will change a lot in probably in the short term rather than the medium term about how quality is, learning. If you get to AGI then next, which I know we're probably geeking out on, but I think that models that learn is going to be really interesting. I think the bit that as a professional in a certain domain that I find really interesting and motivating around this is a bit of a hedge for us as a consultancy at Muuto, but also I think for other firms is there's two tracks to this for me. There is what the hell is the technology going to do, and how is it going to be applied? And that's no different from how do we apply it internally? How do you apply it? How does a big PLC apply
Yeah.
it into their way of working? And that'll be there'll be leaders, there'll be laggards, etc. But in the same way that people started using email or started using machine learning or started using ERP systems,
Yeah.
it'll be fairly level and available. The bit that I think is most exciting as an organizational guy is how the hell do you change your organization in order to adopt this at the scale and the profound level of change that you're going to have to re-engineer around the way you run your company, because it's a different mindset, it's a different skill set, it's a different operating model, it's a different way of interacting with partners, third parties, with data, with regulators. That internal re-engineering is the bit that is novel and the bit that's going to be, I think, for my career, the fascinating stuff to work through before that's then kind of stabilized, and then the next horizon appears. So I'm hoping I'm young enough / old enough to kind of get through this really fascinating stage of organizational change while this stuff is happening and getting legs, but it'll be something that then obviously evolves into the future. So
Yeah,
I think
great.
that's what's going to keep us busy. I hope so.
Yeah, oh yeah, yes. This is, I mean, it's more, I think you and I both agree, this is more than, the next total quality management or business process reengineering or lean. This is something quite fundamental that's going to fundamentally change organizations. What are you seeing from your own clients in terms of this space? Are they, I guess there's very few, as you said earlier, models out there of, to imitate. So are they asking you to come and help with, experimentation, or are they coming to you with specific projects and objectives when it comes to AI and transformation? Or are clients not interested in this? Are they still focused on, I don't know, moving to the cloud or whatever?
I think there's probably a couple of camps. There's the one where we're involved in an intensive piece of delivery work for a period of time, and we need to get through it, and nobody's interested in looking at doing that particularly
Sure.
differently, because
Yeah.
you've got your eyes on the finish line. So I think we'd be rarely will we deploying stuff while we're working at that level of intensity with a client. And I think there's other areas where we're having regular kind of problem solving conversations, but rather than just doing the usual, well, this is how we would tackle it, would you be up for tackling it in this way, or adding an experiment on it, or taking out a little bit of scope and doing something different with it that's not necessarily on the critical path, probably has some kind of business case that said it would self-fund, because if I can do a 4-week project in 4 days with a bit of development, well,
Yeah.
there's a win-win there, and most people seem to be up for it, at least in principle. And then when you get
Okay.
into the details and data privacy and all that sort of stuff, then it's a bit more complicated. But no more than any other piece of work. And then there's others who I think, maybe this is just general take up on AI and use of, is it's how do I if it's the forward question of, if I ask somebody what kind of what they want to travel in, it would say a faster horse rather than a completely different way of working. So they're asking for a faster horse rather than thinking about re-engineering from an AI.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I'm guessing that still makes sense in some businesses. I always think we've done the task stuff quite well. So you can get it to write an email or summarize a conversation or do a bit of analysis. And I think we're moving to the process level now, where we're seeing more end-to-end processes, sort of through a combination of AI, automation, and humans. But certainly that process is being re-engineered, to use an old term. But I haven't seen much out there that's approaching anything like enterprise yet.
No, just maybe it's a reflection there, is a lot of the things about buying a digital product or bringing in an external service provider is it lays off some of the risk and the accountability onto another party. And if you
Sure.
are experimenting internally with something to re-engineer, and it's maybe the first time it's been trialed, and it's your specific process, it's quite exposing, and there's quite a lot of risk, professional and personal risk in there for the buyer. So I think there's maybe a bit of reticence in there as well. Who wants to be the first mover? Because it's bloody hard work, right? This doesn't, because there's no, it's never been done before. Even
Yes.
if it makes it easier and more efficient on the back end, the actual development and thinking and problem solving on it is highly complicated from
Yeah.
a consultant point of view.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so if you were going to now, I think you're overly modest in terms of where Muuto is and where your people are. But if you were going to give advice to a boutique leader, in terms of, and they're, so let's say they're completely new to the whole AI thing, and they think there's some opportunities there, but they've got no idea what, and they're not technical, and their senior team aren't technical. How would you encourage them to start experimenting? What types of things would you suggest they keep an eye out for?
First thing would be behavioral, I think, and this is just my, the consulting 101 is what my boss is interested in, I'm fascinated by. So if you are an MD of a consulting company and you're not into this, then everybody will see that, and they won't, the demand won't be there. If you're going to positively reinforce it, you've got to be visible, active, challenging, encouraging, all at the same time. So I think that role modeling piece is critical. And then people have permission to experiment.
Yep.
And to reinforce that, I've now got a policy. If anybody brings me anything, I say, have you used AI on this to rehearse it, to check it, to challenge it, to improve it? And if the answer is no, I say, well, have a run at that, because it's more efficient use of my time, our time, to talk about the problem. So I think behaviorally, I put that in that space. I mentioned this briefly, but I think there's no silver bullet. There's no Microsoft deployment of this that's going to fix everything for you. So I think enabling people to experiment and trial and fail and celebrate the stuff you've learned by failing is really important as well. Again, it's probably how you operate, but giving people the chance to do that. So giving them the tools, funding it, having some kind of sufficiently safe but light touch policy and guidance around it, because people immediately want to hang on to guardrails. So I think you've got to give them that. We've done that pretty quickly as well. Yeah, I think those are the obvious bits.
Cool. All right. Thank you. And I guess I'm going to add to that while I'm here, because I speak to, as you know, I speak to lots of founders and CEOs and MDs and all the rest of it. And I'll always ask the AI question, just in terms of I'm learning from them. And very often they'll say, well, we have co-pilots. So, we're, and I'm a big fan of getting, I mean, Copilot can do some interesting stuff, but go and play with the models. If you've got someone in your team who can, then build in a few APIs or use some zaps to connect with other systems. I mean, you don't need to be a coding expert to do any of that stuff. I can't code. I don't know if you can, but I've certainly had some great experiences. And actually, AI can code for you if you need it.
No, I've got a Java certificate somewhere, but I definitely can't
There you
code.
go.
Yeah, well, so the way we've kind of encouraged this as well is what is something, and this is to like the whole team, is what takes time that you could, redundant time of a task or an activity or whatever that you think you can make more efficient. What do you not enjoy doing that you think you could, automate in some way, shape, or leverage this stuff? And we've actually started people pairing up on these use cases, and we have a sort of 2-weekly sprint cycle, and people pick something, declare what they're doing, go off and experiment, post a video. One of the team, in fact, my PA the other day, we were paired up doing something, and Claude started generating some scripts in Python. I mean, I don't think she'd ever seen any computer code before, and it was literally scaring her, I think, as we looked at it.
Wow.
But then when we looked at the output, it was just like outsourced a complex job for a simple automated task. And I think it's that kind of, the more exposed you are to it, the less it's scary after a while. So you've either got, I think, technologists or people who are not technologists. I don't do data, I don't do programming, I don't do code, whatever. And I would probably put myself in that camp. I've seen enough of other people do it effectively that it's helpful. But I think it's breaking down that fear for some people. Maybe it's too exposed. I mean, maybe these models are too, because they show you it in some of the the canvases that they're working, and people would rather not see how the sausages get made. But it's all part of the learning cycle.
Yep. Yeah, and increasingly the skill set, unless you are tech, is actually around, well, what happens around the box. So, it's not so much the code, it's, well, what do I do with it afterwards? And if it doesn't work, then what do I do then? And I've been experimenting with Zapier, and it's quite remarkable what you can connect now with virtually no cost and virtually no technical ability. Um, yeah, good. Okay, so okay. Where is there anything else that you think is particularly interesting, either in terms of where we're going, what you've seen elsewhere, or anything else that you would say to another leader when it comes to AI?
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of getting too detailed into some of the technology about this, I think I think if you turn it around on the boutiques and what does it mean for us, I think as and when other firms like us start to not crack it necessarily, get their head around how they're going to bill for this kind of support in a different model from
Mm,
time and materials or fixed price or resource and outcome, I think that's going to be really interesting because as soon as you start to bring this in, you're basically competing against yourself on
yeah,
prices and resource deployment. So um, we've got to work out how to put a figure and a mechanism around the value to the client.
yeah,
So I think that's going to be interesting to battle with. Um, no, I think the other stuff is nothing really. I just think it's so. I find the bit that's fascinating is there's so many different problems to be solved, and there's so many different ways to solve it, and it's kind of marrying marrying
mm,
them up. And I think that'll be very different on a firm by firm basis because it's different domains, different client bases, etc. So I think they'll see some of the same challenges that we're facing and trying to tackle, but probably at the same rate that everybody else is.
yeah, yeah. Interesting times, Tomo.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's fun. It's fun to be working. Still not letting me start later in the day and finish earlier in the evening. So, in
um,
fact, I probably think I'm less efficient as I start experimenting through some of these tasks. But at least it's more interesting.
I'm getting a lot more done faster, but I'm just filling my time with other things. So it's and not, still work stuff, it's not like I'm off, riding horses or learning the banjo. Um, so I think with entrepreneurial types, there's a mindset challenge there as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Well, this is the thing. I don't think we're going to be out of jobs. Like
No,
the things are going to shift, and I think there will be certain sectors, certain jobs, certain types of work that will be hugely impacted. We know this, but there will be new things that need addressing. So I think again, that's the epoch that we're in or heading into. We'll see.
interesting times, as I say. Okay, Tomo, thank you so much for your time. I'll put the links to your bio and LinkedIn and Muto in the show notes. But in the meantime, thanks for your insights and expertise. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks, Jared. Happy if anybody wants to connect, they'll find me through those channels. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. Happy to chat.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
All the best. See you soon. Cheers.